Grace grew up in a small town where everyone knew each other. Her father fixed cars at the local garage, and her mother taught third-grade students at the neighborhood school. Their house wasn't fancy, just a two-bedroom place with faded blue paint and a small garden where Grace's mother grew tomatoes and peppers in summer. They didn't have much money, but Grace never felt poor. Her parents made sure she understood that being rich wasn't about how much you owned, but about how you treated others. As a teenager, Grace worked weekends at her uncle's hardware store, learning to mix paint colors and cut keys. She saved every dollar she could for nursing school, dreaming of helping others. By 25, she was halfway through her degree, waking up at 5 every morning to work the early shift at Sunrise Cafe before rushing to afternoon classes. The cafe sat on the corner of Main and Oak, nothing special to look at but famous locally for its fresh-baked muffins and strong coffee. Grace knew most customers by name and order. The usual, Mr. Peterson. She'd ask, already reaching for the cinnamon rolls. Or, how's your daughter's soccer team doing, Mrs. Chen? While pouring coffee just the way they liked it. That's why she noticed the quiet man who started coming in every weekday morning at exactly 7:15. He always ordered plain black coffee and sometimes toast, sitting alone in the corner booth with his laptop. He wore simple clothes, just jeans and button-up shirts with the sleeves rolled up. Nothing about him screamed money or importance. New in town, Grace finally asked on his 5th visit, tired of wondering. The man looked up, seeming surprised someone was talking to him. His eyes were deep brown and tired-looking. Just here for a few months, he answered, his voice deeper than she expected, working on a project nearby. His name was Thomas, she learned over the following weeks. He never talked about his work much, just mentioned it involved computers and problem-solving. Grace found herself taking extra time at his table, first just to refill his coffee, then to chat about books they'd both read or funny stories about town. "You don't ask what I do for a living," Thomas mentioned one day, looking puzzled. Grace shrugged. "Does it matter? You seem nice enough. You tip well. You're polite to the kitchen staff. That tells me more about you than your job title." Something changed in Thomas's face then, relief maybe. He started coming in not just for breakfast, but sometimes for late afternoon coffee when Grace finished her shift. They'd talk about everything and nothing, her nursing studies, his childhood memories of fishing with his grandfather, movies they'd seen. What Grace didn't know was that Thomas rarely gave his real last name. People knowing him as just Thomas was a blessed relief from his normal life. Because Thomas Lee wasn't just some random tech guy. He'd owned Tech Future Industries, one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the world. His simple clothes weren't budget options, but expensive basics chosen to help him blend in. The project bringing him to town was actually buying land for a new headquarters, a billion-dollar decision he could make with a single signature. But with Grace, he was just Thomas who liked his coffee black and laughed at her terrible jokes. For the first time in years, someone was seeing him, not his bank account or his business profile in the financial magazines. 3 months after they met, Thomas asked Grace to dinner at the small Italian restaurant down the street. 6 months later, on a regular Tuesday evening, while walking through the town park, he stopped beneath an old oak tree and pulled out a small blue box. "I don't have much family," he said nervously, "and my life is complicated. But I've never met anyone like you, someone real. Someone who cares about people, not things." Grace accepted his proposal, hugging him tightly, thinking she was saying yes to a nice, ordinary man with a steady job in computers. She had no idea that the simple silver ring he slipped onto her finger cost more than her parents' house. She had no idea that her life was about to change completely, or that her biggest challenges weren't just ahead, but would come from his world, not hers. Grace had never been on a private jet before. The seats were soft leather, and a friendly flight attendant kept offering her snacks and drinks. Thomas held her hand as the plane took off, heading to what he called the family home. Only yesterday had he finally told her the full truth, that his last name was Lee, that his family owned not just one company but dozens, and that the small gathering they were flying to was actually his parents' annual charity gala. "You're not mad I didn't tell you sooner?" Thomas had asked, looking worried. Grace had just shaken her head. "I fell in love with you, not your bank account. But I'm not sure I packed the right clothes for meeting billionaires." Now, looking out the plane window at the clouds below, Grace felt her stomach twist into knots. She'd bought a new dress for meeting his family, the nicest one she could afford on her cafe wages. It had seemed pretty in the store mirror. The car that met them at the airport was longer than Grace's entire bedroom. The driver wore white gloves and called Thomas Mr. Lee, sir. Grace stared out the window as they drove through massive iron gates and up a winding driveway lined with perfectly trimmed trees. "That's your parents' house," she whispered when the mansion came into view. It looked like something from a movie: stone walls, tall windows, and at least 4 chimneys that she could count. Thomas squeezed her hand. "Just remember, they're regular people underneath all this." "Well, sort of." The front door opened before they reached it. A tall woman with gray-streaked black hair stood there, wearing a silk outfit that probably cost more than Grace's entire year of college tuition. Her face was smooth and tight, like she was trying hard not to show any feelings at all. "Thomas, darling, you're late." The woman's eyes slid over Grace like she was examining a bug. "And this must be your friend." "Mother, this is Grace, my fiancée." Thomas's voice was firmer than Grace had ever heard it. The woman's eyebrows went up just slightly. "Fiancé? How interesting. I'm Vivian Lee. Please come in before the photographers arrive." Inside, the house was even more overwhelming: marble floors, paintings in gold frames, and furniture that looked too perfect to sit on. Grace followed Thomas and his mother into a large room where a man sat reading financial papers. "Harold, look who's finally decided to join us. And he's brought a surprise." Vivian's voice dripped with fake sweetness. Thomas's father looked up, his face showing nothing as he studied Grace. "So you're the reason my son's been hiding in that small town instead of running his companies properly." Grace felt her cheeks burn. "It's nice to meet you, sir." Harold just nodded and turned to Thomas. "The board members are getting restless about your absence. We need to talk." "Later, father." Thomas put his arm around Grace's shoulders. "Right now, I want to show Grace around before the guests arrive." As soon as Thomas stepped away to take a phone call that his father insisted was urgent, Vivian moved closer to Grace. "What's your angle, dear?" she asked quietly. "Excuse me." "Your angle, your plan. No one just happens to fall in love with one of the country's richest bachelors without knowing what they're doing." Vivian's smile never reached her eyes. "Did you research him before you made your move, or was it just lucky timing?" Grace felt her throat tighten. "I didn't know who he was when we met. I just liked him." Vivian laughed, a sound like ice cracking. "How charmingly simple. Tell me, what's it like serving coffee for a living? I've never actually had to work for money." Before Grace could answer, Thomas's father joined them. "Vivian, stop torturing the girl. She'll be gone soon enough." "Gone?" Grace asked. Harold's smile was cold. "My son goes through phases. Last year it was racing cars. Before that, it was investing in those ridiculous tech startups. Now it's playing house with regular people. No offense, but he'll get bored and move on. They always do." That night, at the gala, Grace stood awkwardly in her department store dress while women in designer gowns and diamond jewelry whispered behind their hands. Thomas kept getting pulled away by business associates and old family friends. Each time he came back, he'd find Grace standing alone, no one bothering to talk to the stranger in their midst. "Who exactly are her people?" Grace overheard one woman ask Vivian. "No one, darling. Absolutely no one at all. Just a little project Thomas picked up in some cafe. We're humoring him for now." Despite Vivian and Harold's cold welcome, Grace and Thomas got married 3 months later. Thomas wanted a big wedding at his family's estate, but Grace preferred something small and real. They compromised with a garden ceremony at a local hotel, inviting only close friends and family. Thomas's parents sent an expensive gift but didn't show up. The empty seats in the front row were hard to ignore. "I'm sorry about them," Thomas whispered as they danced at their reception. Grace just smiled. "Today is perfect anyway, and maybe they'll come around eventually." But 2 years later, they still hadn't. Grace finished her nursing degree and got a job at City Hospital, working in the children's ward. Though Thomas insisted she didn't need to work, Grace loved her job. The kids made her laugh, and she felt like she was doing something meaningful with her life. Why does my son's wife need to work like a common person? Vivian would ask whenever they were forced to meet at family events. People are starting to talk. Grace tried her best to fit into Thomas's world while staying true to herself. She learned which forks to use at fancy dinners and how to make small talk with business people, but she refused to quit her job or change who she was. Meanwhile, Thomas's company kept growing. He was often away on business trips, but when he was home, they were happy together in their big apartment downtown. What Grace didn't know was that Vivian had hired a man named Perry to follow her. Perry was a private detective who used to work for the police before he got fired for bending the rules. Every day, he took pictures of Grace, going to work, having lunch with friends, shopping at the grocery store. He gave these photos to Vivian, who studied them carefully, looking for anything she could use. There must be something, Vivian complained to Harold one evening in their study. No one is this perfect. Harold swirled his expensive whiskey in his glass. Everyone has secrets, dear. We just need to dig deeper. Vivian's opportunity came when Grace reconnected with her childhood friend Raj, who moved to the city for a new job. Raj had been like a brother to Grace growing up, and they met for coffee to catch up on old times. Perry took dozens of photos as they hugged hello and laughed together at the cafe. This could work, Vivian said, looking at the pictures spread across her desk, with a few adjustments. She hired a computer expert who changed the photos, making innocent moments look suspicious. A friendly hug became something more intimate. Lunch at a public cafe was made to look like a secret meeting. Dates on the photos were changed to make it seem like Grace was meeting Raj even when Thomas was out of town. But photos alone weren't enough. Vivian needed more. At the hospital where Grace worked, a nurse named Diane was in trouble. She'd made some bad choices with money and owed dangerous people. When Vivian offered to pay off her debts in exchange for a small favor, Diane reluctantly agreed. All you have to do is sign this paper saying Grace made mistakes with patients' medications, Vivian explained. No one will get hurt. It's just to show my son what kind of person he really married. Diane felt awful, but she needed the money. She signed the fake report. The final piece came from Thomas's charity foundation that helped build schools in poor countries. Grace sometimes helped with paperwork when Thomas was busy. Vivian bribed a clerk at the foundation to create fake documents showing money had been transferred to a private account with Grace's name on it. It's all coming together, Vivian told Harold as they finalized their plan. Soon our son will see what a mistake he made. Grace had no idea what was coming. That Tuesday was just another normal day. She went to work, took care of her young patients, and stopped at the grocery store to buy ingredients for Thomas's favorite dinner. He'd been working hard lately, and she wanted to surprise him. But when she got home, carrying bags of groceries and humming to herself, she found Thomas, his parents, and two men in suits waiting in the living room. Thomas's face was pale and hard, like someone she didn't recognize. "We need to talk," he said coldly. Grace put the grocery bags down slowly, her heart beating fast. Something was terribly wrong. Thomas never looked at her this way before, like she was a stranger or worse, an enemy. Vivian stood behind him, her face calm but her eyes gleaming with victory. Harold looked bored, checking his expensive watch as if he had better places to be. "What's going on?" Grace asked, her voice shaking a little. One of the men in suits stepped forward. "Mrs. Lee, I'm David Wilson from Company Security. We have some questions for you." The other man placed a thick folder on the coffee table. "And I represent the Lee family's legal interests," he said in a flat voice. Thomas picked up the folder and pulled out several photos. He threw them onto the table, spreading them out. Grace gasped when she saw them, pictures of her and Raj, but something was wrong about them. The images showed them holding hands, leaning in close, looking like much more than friends. "These were taken over the last 3 months," Thomas said, his voice hard. "Every time I was traveling for business. Care to explain?" Those pictures aren't right," Grace stammered. "Raj is just my friend from childhood. We only met twice for coffee since he moved here." "Thomas, you know I would never." "Save it," Thomas cut her off. "We have more." The lawyer pulled out hospital documents. "We also received this report from the hospital board about several serious medication errors you made that were covered up. Errors that could have harmed children in your care." Grace felt like she couldn't breathe. That's not true. I've never made mistakes like that. You can ask anyone who works with me. We did, the security man said. Your coworker Diane provided a signed statement. Diane? Grace couldn't believe it. They'd worked side by side for almost 2 years. Thomas looked more hurt than angry now. And then there's this. He slid forward bank statements showing transfers from his charity foundation to an account with Grace's name. $500,000, Grace, stolen from children who needed schools. Tears filled Grace's eyes. I didn't do this. Any of this. Thomas, you have to believe me. I gave you everything, Thomas whispered, pain filling his voice. A nobody from nowhere, and I gave you my name, my home, my heart, and this is how you repay me. Vivian placed a hand on her son's shoulder. I warned you, darling. People like her always want something. I just never thought she'd steal from your charity too. Grace turned to her husband, desperate for him to see the truth. Thomas, please. Your parents hate me. They always have. Don't you see what's happening? These are all lies. For just a moment, doubt flickered in Thomas's eyes. But then Harold stepped forward. Son, I know this is difficult, but the evidence is clear. Don't let your feelings cloud your judgment. That's not how I raised you to run a business or a household. Thomas straightened his shoulders, his face becoming a mask again. Security will escort you out. The lawyers have prepared divorce papers. You'll be contacted about signing them. You're not even giving me a chance to explain, Grace cried, tears now flowing freely down her face. I think the evidence explains enough, Thomas said coldly. 2 more security men appeared from the hallway. One started packing Grace's personal things into boxes, while the other stood by the door, waiting to escort her out. You have 30 minutes to collect essential items, the lawyer said. The rest will be packed and delivered to whatever address you provide. Grace tried one more time, stepping toward Thomas, but Vivian moved between them. Don't embarrass yourself further, dear, she said quietly, smiling. You played the game and lost. Be grateful my son isn't pressing charges for the theft. As Grace was led away to pack some clothes, she heard Vivian say, I've already called the press. We need to get ahead of this story. An hour later, Grace stood on the sidewalk outside the luxury building she had called home, holding just 2 suitcases of belongings. Rain had started to fall, mixing with her tears. Her phone buzzed with notifications. The story was already breaking online. Billionaire's wife caught in affair and charity fraud. With nowhere else to go, Grace called the only person she could think of, her old roommate from nursing school who lived across town. As she waited for a taxi, Vivian's sleek car pulled up beside her. The window lowered just enough for Vivian to say, Consider this a lesson, dear. People like you don't belong in our world. You never did. 3 weeks after being kicked out, Grace was staying in her friend Penny's tiny spare room. She tried to get her old nursing job back, but the hospital wouldn't take her calls. The story about her had been everywhere, on gossip websites, in newspapers, even on TV. Her face was blurred in most pictures, but people in the medical field knew who she was. Just give it time, Penny said one morning, finding Grace staring at her phone, reading the awful comments online. People will forget and move on to the next big story. But Grace couldn't move on. She couldn't understand how Thomas had believed those lies so easily after 2 years of marriage. She missed her patients at the hospital. She missed her life. Most of all, she missed the man she thought she knew. Meanwhile, across town in his big empty apartment, Thomas wasn't doing much better. He'd thrown himself into work, staying at the office until midnight most days. When he did come home, he avoided the kitchen where Grace used to cook, the living room where they'd watched movies together, the balcony where they'd had coffee on Sunday mornings. He told himself he was angry, not heartbroken. The evidence had been clear. But sometimes, late at night, he wondered if he should have listened more, investigated deeper. One such night, unable to sleep, Thomas decided to review the company's financial records himself. Something was bothering him. Grace had never cared about money. Why would she suddenly steal from his charity? He logged into the system and started digging through transactions from the past year. Around 2 a.m., he noticed something odd. The transfers to the account in Grace's name had all been authorized with his security codes, but on days when he was in meetings that his parents had arranged. Days when he had left his laptop in his office. Frowning, Thomas dug deeper. He found more strange coincidences. The bank account in Grace's name had been opened just 4 months ago, with paperwork that looked like her signature, but the address was wrong. It was his parents' beach house address. That can't be right, he muttered to himself. The next morning, instead of going to the office, Thomas visited the bank in person. He asked to see the original account opening documents and the security camera footage from that day. The bank manager was eager to help one of his most important clients. "Here's the footage from that date, Mr. Lee," he said, pulling up a video on his computer. Thomas leaned forward, expecting to see Grace. Instead, he saw a young woman he didn't recognize. She had similar hair color but was definitely not his wife. "Who is that?" he demanded. The bank manager looked confused. "According to our records, that's your wife, sir." Thomas shook his head slowly. "No, that's not my wife." With growing suspicion, Thomas hired a new security team, people with no connection to his family or company. He gave them one task: investigate everything about the evidence against Grace, but tell no one what they were doing. 2 days later, they brought their findings. The photos of Grace with her friend had been altered. The hospital complaint came from just one nurse, Diane, who had recently paid off large gambling debts, and the fake Grace who opened the bank account was a woman who worked occasionally for his mother as a personal shopper. "There's more, sir," his new head of security said, looking uncomfortable. "We found emails between your parents discussing the plan. They've been working on this for months." Thomas felt sick. He had thrown Grace out without even giving her a chance to explain. He had believed the worst about the one person who had loved him for himself, not his money. Meanwhile, at a small diner where Grace had finally found work as a waitress, a customer recognized her from the news stories. "Aren't you that gold digger who cheated on the rich guy?" the woman asked blandly. Other customers turned to stare. The manager called Grace to the back. "I'm sorry," he said, not meeting her eyes. "We can't have this kind of attention. Today will be your last shift." Grace held back tears until she got outside. Another job gone. At this rate, she'd never work in this city again. She was thinking about moving back to her hometown when her phone rang with an unknown number. "Hello," she answered tiredly. "Is this Grace Lee?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes. Who's calling?" "My name is Diane. I worked at the hospital with you. We need to talk. I did something terrible, and I can't live with it anymore." Thomas sat alone in his office, staring at the stack of evidence his security team had gathered. Everything proved his parents had set up Grace. Thomas had photographs showing his mother meeting with the fake bank account woman. He had records of payments to Perry, the private detective. He even had the original, unedited photos of Grace and her friend Rage, which showed nothing more than two old friends having coffee. The worst was the recording of his mother talking to Diane, promising to pay off her gambling debts in exchange for lying about Grace's work at the hospital. "What have I done?" Thomas whispered, putting his head in his hands. His assistant knocked on the door. "Sir, your parents are here for the board meeting." Thomas straightened up. "Thank you. Please show them to the main conference room." For the first time in his life, Thomas was about to stand up to his parents. But he wouldn't just confront them, he had a plan. In the large conference room, 12 board members of Lee Industries sat around a polished table. Vivian and Harold sat near the head, looking confident. They had no idea what was coming. Thomas walked in last, carrying a thick folder. "Thank you all for coming today," he said, his voice steady. "This emergency meeting was called because I've discovered a serious problem within our company." Harold frowned. "What problem? You didn't mention any issues when we spoke yesterday." "That's because the problem is you," Thomas said, looking directly at his parents. "Both of you." The room went completely silent. Thomas opened his folder and began passing out copies of documents to each board member. "What is this?" Vivian asked, her face going pale as she looked at the papers. "Evidence," Thomas replied. "Evidence that you and father created false accusations against my wife. Evidence that you paid people to lie. Evidence that you stole company resources and my personal security codes to frame Grace for theft." The board members started murmuring as they read through the documents. "This is ridiculous," Harold said loudly. "We were protecting you and the company from a gold digger." Thomas placed a small recorder on the table and pressed play. His mother's voice filled the room. All you have to do is sign this paper saying Grace made mistakes with patients' medications. No one will get hurt. It's just to show my son what kind of person he really married. Vivian's face turned from pale to red. You recorded us? Your own parents? No, Thomas said calmly. Diane did. She felt so guilty about what you made her do that she came forward. She's also speaking to the hospital board right now, clearing Grace's name. Thomas turned to the board members. My parents used company resources for a personal vendetta. They damaged the reputation of an innocent person. They'd put our charity's reputation at risk by creating fake financial records, and they did all this behind my back, using my name and position. This is a family matter, Harold tried to argue. It has nothing to do with the board. Fraud involving company resources has everything to do with the board, Thomas countered. And as the majority shareholder of this company, yes, Mother, I've quietly bought enough shares over the years. I am calling for both of you to be removed from the board and all company positions, effective immediately. One of the older board members spoke up. I've known your parents for 30 years, Thomas. This is very serious. Are you certain about this course of action? Thomas nodded. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. He turned to his parents. You taught me that in business you have to be ruthless when people betray you. Consider this your final lesson to me. The vote took less than 10 minutes. When it was done, Harold and Vivian were no longer part of Lee Industries. You'll regret this, Harold warned as security waited to escort them out. You're nothing without us. Thomas stood firm. No, Father. For the first time, I'm doing what's right instead of what's easy. The only thing I regret is not seeing through your lies sooner. As they left, Vivian turned back, her face twisted with anger. What about that girl? You think she'll take you back after how you treated her? You've lost everything for nothing. Thomas didn't answer. His mother was right about one thing. He had no idea if Grace would ever forgive him. But clearing her name and getting justice was the right thing to do, whether she took him back or not. After his parents were gone, Thomas picked up his phone. He had a long overdue call to make to the woman whose heart he had broken. Grace sat on a park bench, watching children play on the swings. She'd been staying with her parents in her hometown for 2 weeks now. After Diane confessed everything, Grace had given interviews to clear her name. The hospital offered her job back, and the online stories about her were updated with the truth. But Grace wasn't sure she wanted to go back to that life. Her phone rang. It was the 5th time Thomas had called today. Grace had ignored his calls for days, not ready to talk to him yet, but maybe it was time. Hello, she answered, her voice quiet. Grace. Thomas sounded relieved. Thank you for picking up. I've been trying to reach you. I know. Can we talk? Please? Face to face. Grace took a deep breath. I don't know, Thomas. You believe the worst about me so easily. You're right, he said, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But please just give me one chance to apologize in person. Grace thought about it. Part of her wanted to hang up and never look back. But another part needed closure. Fine. One conversation. Thank you, Thomas said. I'm actually closer than you think. What do you mean? Look across the park. Grace turned and saw Thomas standing near the park entrance. He was alone. No driver, no security, no fancy car. He wore simple jeans and a plain shirt, just like when they first met. She stayed seated as he walked over. He looked different somehow, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes. How did you find me? She asked. Your friend Penny told me you went home. Thomas sat on the opposite end of the bench, giving her space. I've been in town for 3 days, working up the courage to call you. 3 days? Where are you staying? The small motel by the highway. Thomas looked down at his hands. I wanted to do this right. No fancy hotels, no showing up with expensive gifts. Just me, asking for a second chance I probably don't deserve. Grace said nothing, waiting. Thomas pulled out a folder and placed it between them on the bench. This contains everything, the evidence against my parents, the real bank records showing they framed you, statements from everyone involved. I've sent copies to every news outlet that ran the original story. Your name is completely cleared. I know, I've seen the news. There's more. Thomas's voice cracked a little. I've removed my parents from the company. They have no power anymore, in business or over me. I've also started a foundation in your name to help people whose reputations were damaged by false accusations. Grace looked at him for a long moment. Do you think that fixes everything? No, Thomas said honestly. Nothing fixes what I did. I trusted them over you. I threw you out without really listening. I failed you completely. A tear rolled down his cheek. The truth is, I was always afraid I wasn't good enough for you. You're so real, so genuine. I grew up in a world of lies and games. When my parents showed me that evidence, part of me believed it because I always feared someone as good as you couldn't really love someone like me. Grace felt her anger softening just a little. You hurt me, Thomas. Deeply. I know. And if you never want to see me again, I'll understand. I'll make sure you're financially secure for life, and then I'll disappear from your world forever. Thomas wiped his eyes. But if there's even a small chance you might someday forgive me, I'll spend every day trying to earn back your trust. Grace looked out at the playground where she used to play as a child. Her mother had always taught her that everyone deserves a second chance, but not a third. It's not going to be easy, she finally said. We can't just go back to how things were. Thomas nodded. I know. If, and it's a big if, we try again, things have to be different. Equal. Partners in everything. Hope flickered in Thomas's eyes. Anything you want. I want time, Grace said firmly. I'll move back to the city. I'll take my old job back. We'll date, slowly, from the beginning. No moving in together right away, no rushing. For the first time in months, Thomas smiled a genuine smile. I'd like that, very much. As they sat talking on that park bench until sunset, people walked by not realizing they were seeing a billionaire and the simple woman who had taught him the most valuable lesson of all, that real love means believing in someone, even when the whole world tells you not to.